David was a 10-year-old boy who loved to help. At home, he was always willing to lend a hand to his parents with chores, and at school, he did the same for his teacher and classmates. David's family didn't have much money, but his parents made it a point to keep him in the best school in the neighborhood because they believed in the importance of education. One day, while walking down the street, David saw a thin, dirty man. Feeling sorry for him, he decided to offer the sandwich his mother had lovingly prepared. The man accepted the snack, and David returned home with a light heart. However, a few days later, the police showed up at their door, and from that moment on, nothing was the same. David's family lived in a small, modest house. It was a simple one-bedroom apartment where each space was just enough for what was needed. The only bedroom belonged to David, while his parents, Jonas and Bruna, slept on a sofa bed in the living room. Despite their simple life, the family was very close-knit and loving. Jonas, who was an engineer, had lost his job and was now working as a driver while searching for another position in his field. Bruna, his wife, was a caregiver and took care of 3 different families. It was common for both of them to work nonstop, even on Sundays and at night. When their parents were out working, David was looked after by one of his grandmothers, who lived in nearby neighborhoods. Seeing his parents so busy, David learned early on the importance of helping out at home. He took care of his school supplies, washed the dishes, and folded his clothes, which made his parents very proud and gave them a little more time to rest. At school, David was also very helpful. He helped the teacher organize the classroom, erase the board, and if any classmates needed assistance, David was the first to volunteer. Even during playtime, he showed his willingness. If no one wanted to be the goalie in soccer, David would volunteer, even though he loved scoring goals. Other parents of the school often asked Jonas and Bruna how they managed to raise David so well. The couple proud would respond that the key was to provide love, discipline, and, of course, to be a good example. In the same class as David, there was a boy named Henry. He was known for being smart-mouthed and a troublemaker, often ending up in the principal's office for his inappropriate antics. One day, Henry asked to borrow a colored pencil in class, but no one wanted to lend him one except David. When Henry didn't want to return the pencil, the other kids advised David to go straight to the principal to solve the problem. But David preferred to talk to Henry. He said he would lend him his pencils every day as long as Henry returned them, and that he wouldn't tell the teacher or anyone else because he trusted him. Henry, surprised to be treated so kindly by a classmate for the first time, was touched by David's attitude. Henry started spending more time with David, and over time, visits to the principal's office decreased until they completely stopped. Even with so much work, David's parents always found a way to spend some time with their son. It was rare for them to be together because work took up so much of their time, but they did their best to take him to the park or for ice cream, even if it was just one scoop because that was all they could afford. They worked hard to ensure David didn't notice the family was struggling financially. David, even at his young age, noticed that his parents were working more and that the refrigerator was becoming emptier. But he never complained because he knew his parents always did their best and solved every problem. They were David's inspiration, and he strived to give his best at home and school. When Davi's parents weren't home, he would play with his friends on the street. They live in a quiet neighborhood, something rare these days. The kids could play in the park, and there were always adults around like the residents, the doormen of the buildings, or the staff from the bakery, convenience store, and restaurant on the street. Everyone knew each other and knew each child by name. The biggest problem they might have was a scraped knee, something common but minor compared to the world's troubles. What really mattered was that everyone took pride in providing the children with a safe and fun childhood, just as all children should have. The park had a slide, swings, a climbing frame, seesaws, and an open field where the children ran and played soccer. Even without goalposts, they used flip-flops to mark the goals, and the rules of the game changed almost every day, as did the number of players. Sometimes there were 3 on each team, other times 6 or even 7, filling the field with children. When they weren't playing soccer, they would play games like Red Rover or Hot Potato. Then one Sunday morning, something different happened in the park. The children arrived early to play, but instead of spreading out across the playground, they all gathered in one corner. On the other side, sitting on a bench, was a different adult. His shirt, which was once white, was stained and worn out. His pants were torn at the ankles. His feet were bare and marked with scars. His beard and hair were gray, and no one could tell if that was his natural color or the result of accumulated dirt. His arms and face were so thin that the bones stood out beneath the skin. One day, the children were in the park, but something felt different. Instead of running and playing, they stood still, looking at the ground, worried. A skinny, dirty man was sitting on a bench, his head down. The children were scared and began to discuss what to do. Should they call an adult? Or maybe it was better to go home and come back later? As they talked among themselves, Davi appeared, bringing a sandwich and a bottle of water. From a distance, he noticed that the other children weren't playing, but he didn't understand why. When he saw the man sitting on the bench, Davi felt curious. With his desire to help, he decided to go up to the man and sat down beside him. "Are you hungry? Do you want a sandwich? I have water too. You can have some if you want," Davi said. The man looked at Davi for a long time without saying anything. Davi thought he must be sleepy since it was Sunday morning, and he also looked very hungry. Then, the man took the water, had a sip, and started to eat the sandwich very slowly. From a distance, some kids ran home, while others kept watching, unsure whether to stay or leave. Davi watched the man eat and felt that there was something strange about him. He had never seen someone like that, so silent. Could the man not speak? Maybe that was his problem. After the man finished the sandwich and water, he finally said, in a weak voice, "Thank you." So, he could speak, but there still seemed to be something wrong. Davi wanted to help, but didn't know how. Davi asked the man his name, but he replied it was either Luis or Fernando. He wasn't sure. When Davi asked where he lived, the man said it was in a house made of yellow bricks, but there was no such house in the neighborhood. Davi continued to ask questions, but the man's answers were always vague. Even so, Davi didn't give up. He kept talking to the man, trying to understand how he could help him. But suddenly, Davi heard his mother calling for him in a way he had never heard before. "Davi, come here right now," shouted Bruna, frightened. Davi ran to her, trying to explain that the man needed help, but his mother didn't want to listen. As soon as he reached her side, Bruna held him tightly, still worried. Bruna looked firmly at the man and shouted with all her strength, "Get out of here and never come back. If you come near my son again, I'll call the police. Leave now." Davi, her son, stood frozen, scared and confused about what was happening. The man, without saying a word, heard everything, slowly got up and walked away, always with his head down. Bruna continued yelling until he was far away. Then she took Davi's hand and almost ran back home with him. When they got home, Jonas and Bruna, still shaken by the scare, reprimanded Davi. "We've explained so many times that you shouldn't talk to strangers. That man could have hurt you or even taken you away, and you'd never see us or your friends again." The lecture was long, and Davi, with a heavy heart, just wanted to help but felt even more confused. He went to his room and stayed there for the rest of the day, both because his parents told him to and because he didn't feel like playing anymore. Later that night, Bruna went to Davi's room. She sat next to him on the bed and more calmly explained, "Son, we reacted that way because we love you more than anything. We can't even think about the idea of something bad happening to you. I promise we won't talk like that again, but you also need to do your part and not talk to strangers." Davi listened quietly and at the end just nodded. But he still had a question. "Mom, did anyone else talk to that man? He seemed to need help." Bruna explained that a child had called their parents at the park, but when the adults arrived, the man had already left. With sadness, she said, "Son, sometimes we can't help everyone, no matter how much we want to." Davi felt sad for not being able to help the man more than for his parents' scolding. Still, he decided to obey them. After all, they were his biggest inspiration. The next day, without Davi knowing, Jonas and Bruna had a meeting scheduled at their son's school. They let him enter through the gate, and after a few minutes, they went in too. In the reception area, they waited a bit until they were directed to the principal's office. The office was simple, with a desk and a wooden cabinet, a floor fan, and a large window with blinds, as well as pictures decorating the walls. Although it was a little warm, the environment was welcoming. Principal Selma, a lady who seemed old enough to be the students' grandmother, greeted them with a polite and formal smile. asking them to sit down. She wore a beige blazer, maintaining her firm posture and good health. Her hair was dyed blonde, and the glasses she wore were very stylish. Jonas and Bruna, who had scheduled the meeting, were nervous. The principal already imagined what they wanted to discuss, so she patiently waited for them to start. The couple looked visibly embarrassed, even a bit scared. They had fallen behind on their son's tuition payment and might need to delay it further. They apologized and promised they would pay everything. They explained that they were working more hours to support the family and that their son's education was their top priority. Selma, the principal, listened calmly, understanding that Jonas and Bruna needed to vent and wanted to explain the reason for the delay so it wouldn't seem like they were disrespecting the school. After listening attentively, Selma reassured them, saying that Davi was very welcome at the school. However, she explained that they already had a generous discount on the tuition, and if all the payments weren't made by the end of the year, Davi's enrollment couldn't be renewed. Jonas and Bruna thanked her for understanding, even knowing that this was the only thing the school could do for them. Deep down, they were scared, as they could barely scrape together enough money to pay their monthly bills and needed to settle the debt by the end of the year, or they would have to take Davi out of the school he loved so much. Meanwhile, Davi, unaware of anything happening, was studying in a classroom just a few doors down. The whole neighborhood had heard about a strange man who showed up at the park, and the school children couldn't stop talking about it. They started treating Davi differently. If he had previously been seen as a model boy who helped everyone, now people said he was irresponsible for having spoken to a stranger. Mothers used him as a negative example, and some classmates, who had always wanted to sit next to him, began to avoid him. The school decided to organize time between classes to talk about safety and the dangers of talking to strangers on the street, which made Davi feel even more embarrassed. He even thought about hiding in the school bathroom until the end of the day. He was so ashamed. He knew that the adults only wanted to protect the children, but he felt frustrated because no one seemed to understand that the man needed help. Davi thought that if people were more attentive and helped each other, the world would be a less dangerous place for everyone. A few days later, still that week, someone knocked on Davi's door. Jonas was alone with his son, as Bruna was on duty at one of her patients' homes. The father felt anxious. He just wanted some peace after the stressful days they had been through. When he opened the door, Jonas's heart raced at the sight of two police officers at his door. They greeted him respectfully and got straight to the point. "We received a notification about an incident on Sunday. Your son encountered an unknown man at the park. We need you to tell us everything that happened." Jonas's mind was confused, as he knew the whole neighborhood was talking about the incident. Many children had also seen the stranger in the park. If the police were involved, perhaps that man was dangerous, maybe he had committed a crime elsewhere, or even was running from the police. Jonas invited the officers in and offered them coffee, but they preferred just a glass of water. Calmly, he recounted everything he knew. Afterward, the officers asked to speak with Davi, and he consented. They were very kind and patient with the boy, asking numerous questions and taking notes. Curious, Jonas asked the reason for their visit, but the only response he received was, "We can't provide details about the investigation." The officers thanked him for his hospitality and took their leave. Even with his son tired of the whole situation, Jonas couldn't help but reiterate everything he had already discussed with Davi. If the police had paid a visit, the situation was more serious than he had imagined. All he could do was pray that they would never hear from that stranger again and be more cautious when going out. The following weekend, Davi went to spend Saturday at his grandmother's house, as his parents were working. Anastasia, Bruna's mother, had always been a very strict woman. She raised her 4 children with a lot of discipline, demanding good grades and teaching the value of hard work. Bruna had always tried to make her mother proud, even though she rarely received praise. Everything changed when Anastasia became a grandmother. Even though she didn't know how to show affection, she loved spending time with her grandchildren and indulged their every whim. Bruna and Anastasia sometimes argued about the excessive pampering, but they never let the argument go too far. After all, Bruna didn't want to upset her mother in her old age. Anastasia lived in a spacious apartment with a large living room and 3 bedrooms. Although the place was too big for one person, she often had visits from her children, grandchildren, and a sister with whom she was very close. When the house was empty, she took the opportunity to rest, knowing that soon some relative would surprise her with a visit. The building where she lived was also large, with 4 blocks and many apartments. Dobby loved playing in the building's playground, which was quite spacious. There was a covered area that served as a party room and an outdoor area where the children always had fun. The playground featured a slide, a swing, a foosball table, and a ping pong table. All the kids knew Dobby and liked him, even though he only showed up a few times a month. That day, Dobby was playing 3 cuts with his friends and was winning almost all the matches. One of the boys, who was very competitive, tried so hard to eliminate Dobby that he hit the ball with great force. The ball ended up going over the playground wall and out of the building. While the other kids complained, Dobby said, "No problem, I'll go get it," and he ran off without waiting for a reply. Dobby passed through the building's gate and walked around the block. When he reached the other side, he could hardly believe his eyes. Sitting on the ground, leaning against a post, was the same man he had seen the previous week. The man looked even thinner and dirtier, his eyes fixed on the ground. Dobby felt a chill in his stomach and was paralyzed for a moment. Adults had told him to stay away from strangers and to call the police if he saw that man again. But despite that, Dobby felt a strong urge to help him. As he thought about what to do, the man lifted his eyes and saw Dobby. He didn't say anything. He just looked at the boy. Dobby wondered, what is he thinking? Is he really dangerous? Or is he just scared? After all, everyone feels fear, right? Lately, Dobby had noticed that even adults were very afraid. Dobby decided to approach, but stayed a few meters away. He said, "Good morning," but received no response. Trying to make conversation, Dobby asked, "Do you remember me? We saw each other last week. I'm sorry my mom yelled at you. She was just worried about me." Still, the man remained silent. Dobby tried again. "Where is your family?" The man squinted his eyes and murmured, "Family?" Dobby hoped he could understand this man and maybe help him. "Do you have a father and mother? Maybe siblings or children?" The man seemed lost in thought, but soon his eyes returned to being expressionless, staring at the ground. Dobby sighed, frustrated that he couldn't help. Maybe the adults were right after all. Then Dobby had an idea. Yes, the adults were right. He wouldn't be able to help that man alone. So, there was only one thing left to do, the right thing. Dobby turned around and started running, passing 2 blocks, only stopping to cross the streets. Breathless but determined, he finally reached his destination, a 3-story building with a gray and black facade and iron gates. Dobby entered the neighborhood police station with determination, quickly catching the attention of everyone there. The police officers and staff knew the neighborhood well, but Dobby, who only visited occasionally, was a new face to them. A policewoman named Marcella, who had graduated from the academy less than a year ago and always cared deeply about cases involving children, was quick to assist the boy. Even knowing that the neighborhood was quiet and few serious crimes occurred there, Marcella couldn't help but imagine various possibilities when she saw a child entering the police station alone. Were Dobby's parents or siblings in danger? Or had some other child gotten hurt? Hiding her surprise and concern, Marcella approached Dobby and, with a smile, said, "Good morning. How can I help you?" Dobby began to recount everything, from what had happened the previous week to the conversation he had just had with a mysterious man. He explained how he met the man, talked about a sandwich, the reaction the story had at school, the police visiting his home, and even mentioned the street where the man was at that moment. Dobby emphasized several times that the man hadn't done anything wrong, but that he seemed scared and needed help. Marcella grew even more surprised and worried, knowing she needed to take the case seriously. The officers began making phone calls, consulting documents, and accessing files on the computer, comparing the information Dobby provided with what they had already recorded. The officer assured Dobby that the police would resolve the situation. Soon, 3 officers were sent to look for the man, while Marcella offered to accompany Dobby back to his grandmother's house. Dobby really wanted to help, but Marcella didn't allow it. Feeling frustrated inside, Dobby obeyed, knowing he had disobeyed adults many times before and understood that, at that moment, it was best to follow the officer's instructions. When they arrived at his grandmother's house, Grandma Anastasia opened the door and was startled to see her grandson with a police officer. But upon hearing what had happened, she quickly calmed down, hugged Davi, and said, "You did the right thing, my dear. Come on, I'll get you a bowl of ice cream." Later, when Bruna, Davi's mother, came to pick him up, Anastasia told her everything that had happened. She emphasized how Davi had behaved excellently, that he had spoken with the authorities, and that the situation was finally resolved. Bruna was worried but also relieved and happy, both for her son's courageous actions and the fact that the police had taken care of things. What she still didn't know was what the final outcome of that story would be. Davi felt relieved. What mattered most to him was that he was okay, and he didn't want to worry about that stranger. Still, he appreciated the praise he received from the adults, even though he was curious about what had happened to the man. Davi silently prayed, hoping he had received the help he needed. The following week, life seemed to have returned to normal, without the family realizing that everything was about to change forever. Jonas continued working as a driver and was still looking for another job in the little time he had. Bruno worked 10 to 12 hours a day, while Davi studied, helped around the house, and played whenever he could. Then, on a Thursday, someone knocked at the door. Jonas and Bruna exchanged glances, feeling a knot in their stomachs. They didn't want any more surprises. Exhausted, Jonas rubbed his face with his hands before opening the door. "Good evening. Is this where Davi's family lives?" asked a woman who appeared to be in her 50s. She wore a long-sleeved white blouse and a long yellow skirt. "Sorry to show up unannounced. My name is Tanya, and I came as soon as I heard you were the ones who found my husband." Jonas and Bruno were confused, not quite understanding what the woman was talking about. But Tanya, clearly happy and anxious, began to explain. She told them that a few months ago, her husband, Luis Fernando, started experiencing severe headaches and decided to go to the hospital. There, the doctor ordered some tests but didn't think it was anything serious. However, the tests revealed that Luis had meningitis, and he was immediately hospitalized. The doctor explained that if Luis had waited until the next day, it might have been too late. The hospitalization period was distressing, as few people survive such a severe illness, and even fewer do so without lasting effects. Fortunately, Luis Fernando managed to recover, but the doctors warned that he would experience memory loss for some time. At first, the symptoms were mild. Luis confused the days of the week and mixed up the names of things. He, Tanya, and their children took the situation with good humor, supporting him and laughing at the little mix-ups. Luis himself made jokes when he realized he had forgotten something. As the days went by, Luis began to feel more confident about going out alone. In the beginning, he would just take a walk around the block, claiming he recognized the streets, even though he couldn't remember their names. Tanya, while happy about her husband's recovery, felt her heart race every time he went out. One day, Luis went out for a walk and took longer than expected to return. After an hour, Tanya became frantic, called the police, and searched the entire neighborhood, asking if anyone had seen her husband. It had been a month since Luis Fernando disappeared, and the police were searching for him all over the city without success. Tanya dedicated her days to finding her husband, spreading notices online, and walking the neighborhood in hopes of spotting him. So she could hardly believe it when she learned that the police had finally found Luis, and she was even more grateful to discover it was thanks to Davi and his family. One day, everyone in the neighborhood started talking about a boy who had given a sandwich to a man on the street. The description of that man matched Luis Fernando. It didn't take long for them to find his family. They were there, personally thanking Davi for helping Luis Fernando reunite with his family. Jonas and Bruno were surprised. No one imagined that the strange man in the square was actually a relative who was lost and needed help, except for Davi. Tanya, Luis Fernando's wife, wanted to hear their story and felt even more grateful when she got to know the people who saved her husband's life. She was especially touched by the kind boy who wanted to help from the very first moment he saw Luis Fernando. "So young and already an example for all of us," she said after hearing the story and thanking him once again. Tanya didn't want her gratitude to be expressed only in words. She said, "Your family saved mine, so I need to do everything I can to give back." Luis Fernando needed medical follow-up, especially after spending so many days on the street. So, Tanya invited Bruna to be his caregiver. Since Bruna was already taking care of her elderly mother and aunt, Tanya assured her that she would continue working even after Luis Fernando was fully recovered. The pay offered was higher than what Bruna received from the 3 families she worked for. Thus, Bruna wouldn't have to work 2 shifts in a row or take on extra hours. Coincidentally, Luis Fernando was an engineer, and the company he worked for hadn't restructured since he went on medical leave. They needed a new engineer, and that same month, Jonas would return to working in his field. In the end, Tanya promised to sponsor Davi's education until he finished college. She felt the deepest gratitude towards him, so she would ensure he lacked for nothing. Davi's family could hardly believe what was happening, and even said they couldn't accept all of this. But Tanya was determined and insisted it was all because of Davi. Naturally, the parents wouldn't refuse the opportunity to secure a good future for their son. Davi's life and that of his family only improved from there. Bruno worked in Tanya and Luis Fernando's home for 2 years until he was fully recovered. After that, Bruno began caring for Tanya's mother, and Jonas worked at the same company as Luis Fernando, dedicating himself so much that he was promoted within a few months. When David's family's financial situation began to improve, a dream that once seemed distant finally became a reality. They managed to buy an apartment. It wasn't a palace, but it was a special place, full of charm and comfort, as if it had been tailor-made for them. David remembered the moment when his parents first walked into their new home with their eyes shining with happiness. What delighted him most was seeing his parents enjoy a room just for them, where they could relax and have their own space. And the dining room, it was a wonderful place where they could gather, have family meals, and entertain friends, creating unforgettable memories. Best of all was the ample space to play. David and his siblings spent hours having fun there, inventing games and laughing until their bellies hurt. With the new apartment, David also had the chance to attend the school he loved so much. It was a place that inspired him and where he always felt at home. His years of dedication and hard work did not go unnoticed. Upon graduating from high school, David achieved an incredible feat. He placed first in the entrance exam, a dream come true. As a special gift, Tanya and Luis Fernando, close family friends, gave him all the college books. Those books were not just study materials. They were symbols of support and affection, and David cherished them proudly. The 2 families, David's and Tanya and Luis Fernando's, remained close over the years, sharing joys and challenges. Their friendship became an unbreakable bond of support and love. As David grew, his humility and desire to help others began to shine even brighter. He inspired everyone around him with his generous spirit and ability to see the best in people. In school, college, and later at work, David was known as a model citizen and an unforgettable person. His teachers and friends often remarked on how David renewed their faith in humanity. He had a special talent for seeing the light within each person, no matter what was visible on the outside. Even with all the praise he received, David never let vanity get to him. Instead, he used every word of appreciation as fuel to become an even better person. His generous heart and his eagerness to learn and grow were limitless. So, did you enjoy the story? The channel Universo Yin Palabras appreciates your company and would love to hear your opinion. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave your comment below. Until next time,